Greetings. I'm Michael Quinn Patton to discuss evaluation evidence and emotions. This topic was stimulated by a session at the European Evaluation Society meeting in June of 2022, at a session convened by Bert Perrin on how to convince people with evidence. People like climate deniers, those who are against being vaccinated, white supremacists and racists, Trump admirers, Holocaust skeptics, nothing work cynics, or pick your group that you're trying to convince of something whose positions you want to affect with evidence and argumentation. How do you do that? As American humorist Mark Twain once said, it ain't what you know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And so evaluators engage with providing people evidence to challenge what they know that just ain't so. We do this by reasoning. Evaluation pioneer Michael Scriven wrote an entire book about reasoning. For the last decade, we've been paying a lot of attention to evaluative thinking, to logic, to rationality. In Scriven's Evaluation Thesaurus, he opens by saying that evaluation matters because it controls and counters human passions and irrationalities. Scriven's general logic of evaluation means that evaluation judgment involves establishing criteria, constructing standards, measuring performance, synthesizing judgments of merit and worth. It's a logical enterprise, a logical process. And evaluative thinking is based upon logic and rationality. This is true for science in general. The great cosmologist Carl Sagan said, "Science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge." His successor, Neil deGrasse Tyson, has said, "You've never seen me debate anybody on anything, ever. My investment of time as an educator is, in my judgment, best served teaching people how to think about the world around them. Teach them how to pose a question, how to judge whether one thing is true versus another." President Obama got involved in this emphasis with his support of STEM programs, scientific math programs. He said, "Science is more than a school project or the periodic table or the property of waves. It is an approach to the world, a critical way to understand and explore and engage with the world, and then have the capacity to change the world." We emphasize evaluation as critical thinking, comparing points of view, deductive thinking, analytical thinking, visual spatial thinking, evaluative thinking. We're developing critical thinkers for the 21st century, able to think deeply. Bloom's taxonomy puts evaluative thinking at the center of ways of understanding and making sense of the world. Hannah Arendt, the philosopher who studied the Holocaust and sat in on the trials at Nuremberg, concluded that the Holocaust was able to happen because ordinary people and those involved in carrying out the atrocities of the Holocaust simply stopped thinking about what was going on. She called it the banality of evil, making evil ordinary by not thinking about it. Her graduate assistant, Elizabeth Minnick, carrying on her work in philosophy, has written books on the importance of knowledge for transformation and the evil of banality, subtitled On the Life and Death Importance of Thinking. I co-edited a book with Elizabeth on thinking, action, and the fate of the world that we call thought work, that emphasizes the importance of teaching people critical thinking. And much of this remains based upon an image of the human being as a rational being. When I was in undergraduate school 50 years ago, Homo economicus was a completely rational human being who maximized utility in pursuit of wealth and his own interests. Homo emotionalis was biased, emotional, socially influenced, and error-prone. Homo economicus, or what we call economic man, refers to an idealized person who acts rationally with perfect knowledge and who seeks to maximize personal utility or satisfaction. But that image has run up against research on behavioral economics and finance. Research that integrates psychology and economics. And it turns out that we are not completely rational, logical human beings. We have emotions. Indeed, our emotions affect our judgment on, including, of all things, money, relationships, decision-making of all kinds, consumer decisions, personal decisions, finance decisions. And so we return to this session at the European Evaluation Society, how to convince people with evidence. And the answer is that it's not just about evidence. Positions are not just cognitive positions. They are also have emotional attachments. What we've learned is that when we process information in our brains, we do a cognitive search for where to place that information in relationship to things that we already know, but we also are doing an emotional search to place information where it makes us feel good, because we prefer to feel good than feel bad. And so processing information involves both cognition and emotions. And so in the battle between facts, evidence, truth, data, reality, thinking, versus post-truth, fake news, alternative facts, make-believe, groupthink, distortions, we have to begin by listening to people who have those opposite positions. Listen for not just their thoughts, but their feelings, and engage with them not just about the evidence, but about the basis for that evidence, the attachments to it, the emotional content, and share a vulnerability, recognizing that change in positions involves both cognitive changes and emotional repositioning, and that's part of what makes a difference and difficult. And so we have to model openness, respect, and empathy, not just try to overwhelm people with evidence. It's an interaction. It's a social construction. It's not simply argumentation. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his book on thinking fast and slow, which includes major portions on how, as human beings, we have greater fear of loss, we have an aversion to loss, greater resistance to things that may cause us to change than to achieving success and having positive outcomes. We are loss aversion, deeply loss aversion. Actions are grounded in thoughts and emotions. In the more recent book that Daniel Kahneman has done with colleagues called Noise, he examines in greater detail how our judgment is affected by emotions, by context, by situation. He gives examples of, in a courthouse in Miami, one judge would grant refugees asylum in 88% of cases, while another would do so 5% of the time. Both well-trained judges. A large study of radiologists found that the false positive rate ranged from 1% to 64%, meaning that 2/3 of the time, a radiologist said a mammogram showed cancer when it was not cancerous. Doctors are more likely to prescribe opioids at the end of a long day. Judges make harder decisions leading up to their breaks and on hotter days. And insurance firms' underwriters assessed premiums that varied by 55%, a difference that was 5 times greater than its management had imagined. All of this noise, the authors say, was occasion noise, fluctuations in judgment based on a person's mood, fatigue, physical environment, and prior performance that are objectively irrelevant, yet shape judgments. Like the study titled Clouds Make Nerds Look Good, which examined 682 actual decisions by college admission officers. They weighed applicants' academic strengths more heavily on cloudier days and applicants' non-academic strengths more heavily on sunnier days, affected by context, affected by emotions. Elinor Ostrom, 2009 Nobel Prize winner in economics, famously said, individual behavior is strongly affected by the context in which interactions take place, rather than the result of individual differences. All of this becomes a matter of what Daniel Coleman has called emotional intelligence, the way in which we make sense of our emotions. Emotional intelligence involves self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, relationship management. It involves being aware of and taking into account our emotions and understanding the emotional reactions of others that come out of social interaction. This way of thinking has a long history. Adam Smith, he of the invisible hand fame, in his theory of moral sentiments, viewed humans as social beings to be naturally attentive to how those with whom they interact think and feel. Through socialization, humans develop the capacity to put themselves in the place of others, what today we call empathy. Brian Knudsen, a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Stanford University, has written, scientific inquiry should incorporate emotions as a source of data and insight into the nature of human experience. The absence of emotion, he writes, pervades modern scientific models of the mind. In the most popular mental metaphors of social science, mind as reflex, from behaviorism, explicitly omits emotion, and mind as computer, from cognitivism, all but ignores it. Even when emotion appears in later theories, it is usually as an afterthought. But over the past decade, the rising field of affective science has revealed that emotions can precede and motivate thought and behavior. Emotions can precede and motivate thought and behavior. Emerging physiological, behavioral, and neuroimaging evidence, he writes, suggests that emotions are proactive as well as reactive. Emotional signals from the brain now yield predictions about choice and mental health systems and may soon guide scientists to specific circuits that confer more precise control over thought and behavior. Literally and figuratively, he concludes, we should stop relegating emotion to the periphery and move emotion to the center where it belongs. Move emotion to the center. This applies to evaluation as well as to social science more generally. Let me draw on Paulo Freire's great insights, the Brazilian philosopher and activist who worked on both increasing social consciousness about oppression, but understood the emotional nature of those experiences. In Freire's work on Pedagogy of the Oppressed, we extracted a set of principles for a pedagogy of evaluation, and that includes facilitating critical thinking to open up, develop, and nurture what he called critical consciousness, cultivate consciousness in communities of people, not just individuals, integrate reflection and action, value and integrate the objective and subjective, and integrate thinking and emotion. Dr. Moacir Guidadi, who's the director of the Paulo Freire Institute in Sao Paulo, concluded that Paulo Freire left us the legacy of ethical political roots to support our practices. Wings, that is a theory to go beyond his work, and many dreams, the utopia of a society of equals, or as he affirms at the end of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, quote, the creation of a world in which it will be easier to love. The creation of a world in which it will be easier to love. That evoked for me a song from the Broadway musical Rent, called Seasons of Love, in which the question is asked, how do you measure a year in the life? 525,600 minutes. And the answer, how about love? At the American Evaluation Association in 2020, there was a session on measuring love in the journey for justice. To be sovereign and free, our people need policies made of love, forgiveness, and connection, the authors presented. In it, we are asking ourselves, are we loving bravely enough? And how much am I loving? What else can I do in community from a place of love? And how am I wielding power fused with love? This kind of love is not a feeling, but an action, not a noun, but a verb. It is love actively practiced in community, starting with ourselves, for positive material change, justice, and liberation. And efforts to measure it will challenge us to bring harmony between our intellectual, intuitive, and spiritual ways of knowing, to see with our hearts and minds. And so they created an instrument that looks at 12 dimensions of love that includes self-love, loving others, love as a community practice, love fused with power. And this evoked for me the Minnesota gay marriage campaign in 2012, in which there was a referendum on a constitutional amendment to the Minnesota State Constitution that would have made marriage between a man and a woman and basically banned gay marriage. The campaign was to be based upon human rights, as had some 30 previous campaigns in different states in the United States that were working to achieve gay marriage or to outlaw gay marriage. And more than 30 of those preceding campaigns had all failed to pass a referendum in support of gay marriage. They had all reaffirmed that marriage was between a man and a woman. And so when the campaign came to Minnesota in 2012, examining that history of failure, examining the fact that the human rights argument was not winning support for gay marriage, they changed the campaign from a campaign about human rights, should homosexuals have the same rights as heterosexuals when it comes to marriage, they changed it to a campaign about love. Should people who love each other be able to be married? At the beginning of the campaign, the amendment that would have made marriage between a man and a woman would have passed by over 50%. But the campaign that made this about love ended up defeating that amendment, and a year later actually passing a constitutional amendment legalizing at the state level marriage for homosexuals as well as heterosexuals. Gay marriage became a constitutional amendment, moving the argument from one of cognitive, intellectual logic about human rights to a message that included attention to the emotional content of that political decision. And in the campaign, all that people had to be able to do who were working on behalf of gay marriage was to share stories about someone they knew who were gay, homosexuals who were in love, and tell the story of their love and what it would mean for them to be married. At the 2019, the last face-to-face American Evaluation Association meeting, there was an evaluation poetry contest. And the winning entry was from Eugenia Valur, "Evaluation is making love to questions. Passion about our..." And it becomes important to distinguish the focus of emotions. There's emotional engagement with issues like gay marriage, guns, vaccinations, climate, politics, values, religion, socioeconomic stance. And then there are emotional reactions to evaluation: fear, anxiety, misuse, failure, judgment. These are different locuses of emotions, and we have to be able to deal with both. The emotions around issues, that are addressed in evaluation and emotions about evaluation itself. And so when I'm working with people to deal with the emotional side of evaluation, I will often cite a poem from the poet E. Cummins called Voices to Voices and Lip to Lip. In that poem he writes, "While you and I have lips and voices which are for kissing and to sing with, who cares if some one-eyed son of a bitch invents an instrument to measure spring with?" And I used this poem to open up questions about the feelings about measurement, the feelings about what can and cannot be measured, about the emotional content of programs, and emotional content and reactions to evaluation. Evaluation as a largely or entirely rational thinking enterprise versus evaluation as integrating thinking and feeling. This involves exalting logic and reason versus valuing thinking and emotion, controlling or repressing emotions versus experiencing and understanding emotions, both our own and those of others, confusing empathy with bias versus nurturing and using empathy as a source of data and insight, focusing only on cognitive intelligence versus integrating cognitive and emotional intelligences, developing skills in persuasion and argumentation versus developing skills in connecting intellectually and emotionally. Evaluation as rational, evaluation as frightening and anxiety-producing, acknowledging and dealing with emotions about evaluation. Evaluators as authoritative experts versus evaluators as fellow travelers, co-inquirers, and collaborators. Avoiding, distrusting, being uncomfortable with emotions versus understanding emotions as part of learning, empathy, and mutuality. Indeed, it is one of the classic norms of universities, of academic life, to not get emotional. Professors hate emotion, are afraid of emotion, can't deal with emotional students and emotional content. And so the norm of the university is don't get emotional. But over the years, as I've worked with people around identifying what constitute and make up powerful learning experiences, and have done research on the nature and content of powerful learning experiences, a fundamental theme running through powerful learning experiences is that they are emotional, that they make emotional connections and attachments, and that cognition and emotion reinforce each other. And so, as evaluators, as teachers, as human beings, we need to be comfortable with both our cognitive capacities and the emotional nature of our social interactions, and draw on both of those in working with people.